All right, thank you so much for the introduction, but also for the invitation. I'm really honored that I can speak to an audience that I'm sure is a very distinguished audience. I just can't see them, but that's not so important. I also want to thank Professor Ko and everybody at SAPI for organizing this event, and also for Thomas to be the speaker as well. I'm don't have a word of introduction to say, but I'm actually surprised and not surprised that there is such a great interest about what's happening in Europe, because the debate is not only in Europe, there's debate everywhere. And I'm happy to see that there's an interest in Korea also into the European debate, because the issues might be a bit different in the EU because of the EU, the different countries. But I'm honored that I can help explain, I hope, the proposals that my colleagues from DigiComp have put together. It's one proposal, but it's actually consisting of two parts. We have, as you've said in the introduction, we have a Digital Services Act and a Digital Markets Act. It wasn't clear that it was going to be this way when all of this was put to a public consultation in the second half of last year. But on the 15th of December, this is the New Year's package that we got. And we have been looking, and there's been a lot of debates also in Europe, lots of webinars on this package. And prior to this, prior to the thinking of the EU, there's been thinking and discussions and kind of coming to terms with the power of the digital world. And it's not COVID that actually brought this about, it's actually way before. And competition authorities in many jurisdictions have been thinking that with the current tools that they have, and I'll explain in a second what those are, they feel they are not able to bridge that gap, an enforcement gap. Now, what are we talking about? Competition authorities have competition tools. They can start investigations, they can start a case, or they get a complaint, and there's many ways to actually start a case. But what we've seen is that in these cases, competition authorities have to allege and investigate rather, and then come to a conclusion, an allegation of dominance or of abuse. And so these things take time, lots of evidence. There's also lots of people try to slow down the procedure. And so by the time there is a decision, oftentimes it comes late in the process. It could be 3, 4, 5 years after the facts. And by then, what has been alleged is the markets have tipped, as they say. It's gone. It's difficult they can punish the company, but they cannot undo the harm. And so this is about coming up with a way to actually avoid that harm could happen. And we will see that throughout this presentation that we are looking at new rules that will actually be different than the traditional ex post regular tools and regular treatments. Rather, we will come to an ex ante set of rules to make sure that things in the past would not happen. Markets would not tip anymore. We would be there in time to stop this. So one of the objectives of the combined package is to create fair and open markets, and especially for the DSA, a fair processing of personal data. I remember when I came first to Korea, when I talked about privacy, in my own life, I realized, hey, the slips of the gas bill, they're just thrown in the mailbox. Everybody can see how much gas you've used and how much you pay. And everybody's laughing, those Europeans with the privilege of privacy. But since then, a lot of things have changed, and privacy, data, and competition are part of a triangle these days. And it's a good thing. And so we think that also this package will be addressing a process and measures that have been put in place already by the GDPR. So it's not completely independent from it, because there's references to it, of course. And we had an old e-commerce directive in the EU, which also needed an update. And so this has kind of been folded into the DSA. So this is about the past. we have this proposal now. We will see if it gets adopted and in which way it will get adopted. But if it gets adopted, most likely it will empower the European Commission to have these ex-ante rules and use them. This will actually be the first time ever that this will happen, and there will be a shift, as I mentioned, that we will try to prevent rather than cure, because, and we've realized and noticed that cure is often not possible. It doesn't mean that we will not work with competition rules anymore. I think it's going to be a little bit different, because if the gatekeepers, we will talk about gatekeepers today, I'll explain this later, if they will be subject to kind of continuous monitoring, there'll probably be less cases against those. But again, not every platform is a gatekeeper, so there will still be investigations into platforms that are not gatekeepers. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's just see. Let's just go to the presentation. It's actually, as most of you probably know, I would say that the Digital Service Act is actually in the consumer protection atmosphere rather than the DMA, which is in the competition atmosphere. The Digital Service Act wants to regulate online services, wants to make online sales as safe, as transparent, and as easy as offline sales are. Today, that's not really the case. I mean, we all do e-commerce and we all buy online, but what happens when you have a dispute? We've seen these debates in the press over the last year and a half with US elections on the content that is provided and most often disinformation, actually. So what the DSA wants to do, it wants to make sure that there's obligations on providers of intermediary services on content-related stuff and on transparency to inform the consumer about what's happening. If he sees an ad, why does he see the ad? And what can he do to get rid of it if he wants to, or accept? And this is an instrument that will be applicable to all online services. The DMA is a little bit different. It actually focuses on the economic power of the large online platforms with the intent to control it, to avoid exclusionary or exploitative behavior by those platforms, and to make sure that we have platforms that are open and competitive. All right. Let's start with the DSA. I've already given a little bit away. So it's about transparency for the users, safety, that will be a byproduct of transparency. So every illegal goods and illegal services, illegal goods meaning counterfeited goods or goods where the copyrights have been infringed, should be removed by the platform. And on content, we obviously have also illegal content, hate speech, but also things that do not belong on the internet, that do not belong anywhere to be said. For instance, child porn. It is on the internet, it's being sold and bought, but that should stop. And so these provisions should make it hopefully safer and not safer, but remove those illicit contents. And also to protect users who have been deleted by platforms in an erroneous way. There should be a way to redress that. So there will be transparency obligations on the platforms to actually achieve those. There are already a few of those obligations in another EU regulation, which is called peer-to-business, which came into force in 2019. But this is only for business providers and platforms, business users and platforms. So the DSA will be much broader, of course. And it's also going to be pan-European. So there will be a new enforcement structure. Now, the Commission is not really involved in product safety. That's the Commission coordinates, but it's actually the job of the member states. In the member states, we have what is called market surveillance authorities, and they do offline and also online product safety. And so we will see this will be a little bit revamped, and the Commission will be part of that. All right. About subdividing the services, I hope this drawing helps a little bit understand all these different words. I think if we say everybody who actually is on the network, sellers and the platform provider, they are, and a host of other people, even the internet service provider, and the domain name registrars, they are all intermediate services. And then we have hosting services, people that sell cloud and web hosting services. We have online platforms, and we have very large online platforms. And we make this distinction because there will be different obligations according to who you are in the spectrum. These are graduated for the specific needs of for the size and the impact that each of these have. So the first bullet there is for all the providers, and even for providers that are not within the EU, they will have to establish a point of contact. So when there is a problem with product safety, with content, that there is somebody to contact. This person or this entity, can also be a legal person, will also be in contact, and I've put an abbreviation there, we will come back to this. This is the European Board of Data Services. I've mentioned that we have a network currently of the market surveillance authorities. They will actually designate a person, so 27 of those, and they will compose this board of data services. There are other obligations. I'm not sure we have limited time to go through each and every one of them. I've actually tried to make the slides very comprehensive so that you can read and understand them afterwards. There are specific due diligence obligations that would apply to hosting services and online platforms. That includes redress mechanisms if you have bought something which is not what you've bought or is defective, and also out-of-court dispute settlement mechanisms, which are also, I'm thinking about the name of SAPI. A lot of these are going to be AI-driven in the future. So there is more to expect in the future than what is being tabled here today or within the current form of the DSA. It will also, for the hosting service and online platforms, require that they inform the authorities of the member states where they are when there is an issue, suspicion of a criminal offense involving serious issues, the threat of life or safety of people. They also have to know their customers, their sellers on the platforms. So they have the credentials, they have to vet the credentials of third-party suppliers. So all these, I come back to the point on safety. Yes, greater transparency. And then we come to the obligations for very large online platforms, which are a bit more specific because their impact is bigger because they are offering much more services and they are having a lot more users. So they will no longer be able to say, look, we're just a platform. People come and dump things here and then other people take it away. These days are over. They will be held liable for whatever comes on the platform, and it's their responsibility to actually look at those things and assess the risks. So they have to do this, and I look at the first bullet point, to make sure that illegal contact is not further spread. Child sexual abuse material, or illegal hate speech material, or the conduct of criminal and illegal activities, it's going to be their responsibility to track these down in terms of risk and make sure that these things cannot happen. And this is not, once a year. This is all the time ongoing activity, of course. They must also be the watchguards to make sure that the exercise of fundamental rights, freedom of expression, freedom to information, the right to non-discrimination, and the right to private life are actually safeguarded at all times. and also for intentional coordinated manipulation of platform services. We've seen this in the past in many respects. They will have to make sure that they can do what is necessary to make sure that the public is not affected and it doesn't affect elections or public security or the protection of minors. Let me skip a few. Let me go to E. Those platforms will also have to appoint a compliance officer. That compliance officer is the person who is going to talk to the network that's going to be set up, composed of the European Board for Digital Services and the European Commission. So there will be a dialogue. I mean, this is not going to be, this is a system that's put in place. So there will be ongoing cooperation between the people on both sides. Failure to comply with the DSA will result in fines, maximum of 6% of the company's total turnover, depending on severity, the length, and the recurrence of violations. But the Commission will also have other means to enforce the regulation if that were not enough. There will be periodic payments up to 5% of the daily turnover of the platform in the preceding year, and interim measures. That means that the Commission can say that until and unless the violations have ceased, the company will not be able to operate. The Commission's enforcement powers would allow it to also conduct its own investigations following complaints from the public at large, or upon a request from one of the board members of the EBSD, exactly, EBDS, I'm sorry, EBDS, and provide also advice to the board. The Commission will have strong investigative and enforcement powers to allow it to investigate, of course, enforce and monitor the rules laid down in the DSA. And this can go as far as even conducting drone raids or investigations requiring companies to hand over their database or interviewing of employees. These are elements that we in competition law are familiar with, but this has never been the case in the product safety area or in the consumer protection area, if I can put it that way. But these things will be coming. Well, we'll see if it will be coming. And a last word on the new rules for member states. Digital compliance officers on the one side of the company, but also DSA delegates from the market surveillance authorities will actually meet and coordinate whatever is happening in terms of the mandate of the DSA. And the Commission will have the final authority over the very large online platforms, which will not necessarily fall under the remit of the EBSD. But the EBSD, as we said, can launch a complaint to the Commission. So they will be associated somehow in the follow-up of that complaint. As I mentioned in the last bullet point, if the EBDS finds that a very large online platform has failed to comply with the rules, that platform will have to come up with an action plan to address those violations, and that action plan will be discussed in first instance with the EBDS, but also with the Commission. Let me jump to the digital markets. We only have limited time. Actually, this slide should have been coming at the beginning, but it's here, and I can talk about it at this point in time. We've talked about the objective already, but in all the pages, in all the recitals that actually come prior to the real act, the articles of the act, kind of the whole preamble to justify why things were written a certain way. Recital 10 says that this objective is complementary but distinct from the goal pursued by competition law. This is an important consideration, and we will come back to that in a little bit later in the part on the DMA. What's also interesting is in the legal basis, it was written that this is written for the well-functioning of the internal market, Article 114 on the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. That also implies that this will be adopted by a procedure which is now called the ordinary legislative procedure, but it used to be called co-legislation, where the Council and the European Parliament look at this separately. And well, for people who are not familiar with the process, but let me just say this, the Commission drafts the proposal, which it has done. It needs to be adopted within the Commission, but it doesn't mean it's already applicable. It has to be voted into law, into a regulation. So there's a process of Council and European Parliament coming in, if necessary, for 2 rounds of discussions. But after the first round of discussion, the modifications that both the Council and the European Parliament would wish to see in the original draft from the Commission will have to evaluate and see if they want to take that on board. There may be discussions separately with Council and EP. And then when a new text has been tabled, again to the Council and the EP, if necessary, then there's a second reading. So this is going to take some time, as you can imagine. I'm not here to teach EU administrative issues, but regulation actually means it points to the word rule. So it's a rule, it's directly applicable. The other main instrument is a directive. This is not a directive. Directive points to direction. That would mean that the Commission sets the objectives, and then member states can actually each in their own jurisdiction, come up with legislation. We're not talking about this. This is going to be directly applicable. And so there is no need for member states to do anything whatsoever. The regulation, if it's adopted, it's adopted. It's applicable directly in every member state from the date of adoption. It's an important point because, and I'm grateful that Thomas is here, because some member states have or are planning to make and take their own regulation in this respect. We'll talk about this in a short while. Actually, Article 1.5 of the DMA says that member states, once there is going to be a DMA, they cannot apply any further obligations than the one in the DMA. So we will see what happens with member states' regulations that are out there at the time of the adoption of the DMA. Again, we don't know how the DMA is going to look like, but we will see then when it is adopted, and member states will actually have to phase that out. There's one exception: they can still set rules for other legitimate public interests other than the functioning of the internal market. And the DMA is actually, as I mentioned at the beginning, is not a horizontal issue. It's not a horizontally applicable issue. It's only going to be applicable to the big players, the big online platforms. They are referred to as gatekeepers, and we'll talk this. This is actually the central concept of the DMA, and this is what we're talking about. So we will talk about new ex-ante rules that are applicable to gatekeepers, and an important issue before we talk about gatekeepers is that we talk about core platform services, because that is actually what the DMA is all about. It's the regulation of core platform services. All right, and here we come. So the Commission has made up a list. They're all there, and they're orange bullets, and it's a pretty complete list. But in case it wouldn't be complete, the Commission has the power to add further services. I mean, that's what the text says today. We'll see what comes out. But so basically, everything is there: messaging, social networking, search, video sharing platforms, TikTok, YouTube, operating systems, cloud computing, advertising also. So as I've mentioned, the DMA regulates core platform services rather than the company. That means that if they look at a large online platform, such a platform could be active in one of those 8 activities and can be designated as a gatekeeper for more than one. And then the obligations of the DMA would apply to, in this example, search and social networking would apply to those 2. But if they're active in other areas, if they're not active in other areas, of course, then it's just going to be applicable to those designated under the DMA. Now, who are those gatekeepers? There's actually a double test, if I can say. On the left side, you can see 3 qualitative criteria. So providers of core platform services shall be designated as a gatekeeper if A, it has a significant impact on the internal market. By the way, internal market means the EU, the market in the EU. The common market used to be called the common market, but we refer to it now as the internal market. The second criterion is that it is an important gateway for businesses to reach end consumers. Now, what is important? It has not been defined on purpose. And thirdly, provider of core platform services will be designated as a gatekeeper if it enjoys or is expected to enjoy in the near future an entrenched and durable position in its operations. Now, those are kind of broad, and the Commission has a lot of marginal discretion to appreciate these. But at the same time, we have a number of quantitative criteria defined at Article 3.2. And if these are met, then the presumption is that the qualitative criteria are met. So there are basically 2 tests there: the size of the undertaking and the number of people reached through core platform services. So the size of the undertaking, it would be an annual turnover of at least 6.5 billion euro. Yeah, in the last 3 years, or an average market cap of a market value of at least 65 billion euros. And the undertaking provides CPS, core platform services, in at least 3 member states. Then the test itself about the number of people it reaches. It should reach at least 45 million people monthly. That would be active end users, and more than 10,000 yearly active business users. Why 45? I think the reason is that they meant 10% of the EU population. EU population is 450 million, so 45 million would be 10%. I don't know why they've chosen 65. I'm not sure there's a reason for that, but at least it's not clear to me. The last condition, that these 2 above thresholds have to be met by an important gateway in the last 3 financial years. The idea of putting people as gatekeepers is because the philosophy is that because of their size and the number of people they use and they serve, and the number of and the impact they have, they carry a special responsibility. And that special responsibility is actually also something that comes back in Article 102 when we talk about dominance. We don't talk about dominance in the whole paper. We don't talk about market shares at all. There's also talk in the US about action against platforms there. In Senator Klobuchar's paper, they talk about percentages, 50% dominance and blah, blah. Here we don't do that. The Commission has been silent on those things, let's put it that way. So the process is that as soon as companies realize, oh, I'm a gatekeeper, they have 3 months to notify the Commission. And then they have 6 months after the Commission has taken the decision that they are indeed gatekeepers, to comply with the obligations that are linked to the status of a gatekeeper. there's a few caveats. They can also apply for suspension of particular obligations, which in the DMA, the EC says they will only grant exceptionally and in light of specific circumstances beyond the control of the firm. But I'm sure people will, gatekeepers will not be happy with that designation and will try everything to not be considered a gatekeeper. And there is room for a rebuttal presumption. You can, as a gatekeeper, but as a would-be gatekeeper, you could be complying certain criteria, but these are not final. There's still some discussion possible with the Commission, and if at the end of that discussion the Commission would say no, you're a gatekeeper, then you can go to court. So there is room for, I wouldn't say for maneuvering, but there is some flexibility in the system. On the other hand, the Commission may still designate an undertaking as a gatekeeper if it satisfies the size of the two tests, the undertaking and size of the undertaking and the number of people who are served with CPS. Because we've said that there is this caveat that it's not for people, not only for people that currently enjoy an infringement of your proposition, but also for people that are likely to enjoy or are foreseen to enjoy. I think this is I'm not sure this will be in the final version of the DMA, because with all the history that we have seen about mergers between platforms, no one could have, for those mergers, no one could have foreseen what would have become a few years later of those mergers. And also here, if people are really able to foresee that certain platforms will grow and have an entrenched and durable position, I think they should actually be in the stock market rather than doing that job as enforcers, because this is really not easy. The core of the DMA is actually Articles 5 and 6. Article 5 has a number of do's and don'ts, Article 6 as well. Article 5 is what is called self-executing obligations. That means if you read the DMA and you read the text, you should be able to do what is needed to be done as a gatekeeper. It doesn't require any further explanation. So, and we can pick a few. Let's take the don't on the right side. Combine personal data sourced from these core platform services with personal data from any other service that the gatekeeper offers or from third-party services, unless the user, the end user, has actually been presented with a choice and has said yes to that choice. I think this goes back, and again, we will see this also on the next slide. This doesn't come out of the blue. This comes actually from the practice under competition law enforcement that the EU has seen in different cases. I think this comes from a case actually from Germany. Thomas can comment on it later. This is the Facebook case in Germany, where the Bundeskartellamt made a case against Facebook for aggregating the data that they had from the Facebook platform with WhatsApp and Instagram. And so if we look a little bit here and there, we will, the one on the left side, the prohibition of Mfn clauses, that you would not be able to offer the same product that you offer on platform A, also on platform B and C, even at different prices on platform B and C. The fact that you would not be able to allow, the fact that some platforms did not allow that is now going to be prohibited. So it's a do. Please do allow business users, and that probably comes from an Amazon case at I think also in Germany. I'm not going to go down the road of each of these, but those are the ones that should be self-explanatory. The ones that actually may require further specification, it's not that they don't know today what they want to say, but it might be different from incumbent to incumbent. And so these obligations in Article 6 may need to be tweaked to the specific incumbent, to the specific platform. And again, I haven't done the full exercise, but if we pick the first do on the left side, allow users to uninstall any pre-installed software or apps if they wish so from your platform, from their phone, and not to connect through these with the platform. And maybe this comes from an old Microsoft case, which was selling hardware with the pre-installed Internet Explorer. The third one on the left is about interoperability. And so gatekeepers should allow business users and providers of ancillary services access and interoperability with the gatekeeper's own operating system used for, it's all very general, ancillary services, but that includes payment services. And so this could be a huge issue for companies that have app stores or Play stores and want payment through these stores. I mean, I can go on. That there's another one on the right that I've looked at. It's about self-preferencing. I don't think we need to go any further, but those issues will have to be determined further, depending on the platform and the services that are actually provided. The DMA also includes a market investigation function. This was actually part of a bigger discussion during the summer when the Commission put out for public consultation a draft on something they called the new competition tool. This has disappeared from the radar screen. Actually, the Commissioner has said that they folded this into the DMA, and it will still be relevant, but in a much smaller context now for digital services, because it will allow the Commission to do market investigations to investigate whether those gatekeepers, actually, no, it's not yet gatekeepers, people that actually provide core platform services, but that do not meet the quantitative criteria and maybe will have to be monitored for some time before they become gatekeepers. Also to investigate systematic non-compliance with the do's and the don'ts. We don't want to go through the route of the competition policy enforcement type of case, because that's in ex post enforcement. We want to be able to come in before the harm is done. So we need a tool to do that, and market investigation will actually be the tool to look at the gatekeepers and their behavior. And of course, as I've said, also to actually update the list of the current 8, I believe, core platform services, whether these need to be expanded as innovation and technology comes along. It's not all. There's also going to be what is called a merger notification system. It means that the Commission actually wants to know everything about the gatekeepers, also their plans, not just their practices, not just whether they meet their obligations, but what is in the pipeline. And so whenever a gatekeeper has any acquisition plans, they would not need to consult the Commission, but they need to inform the Commission of these. The Commission would actually take this into account just to have a complete industry overview. This is not something they would pick up necessarily, at least not within the DMA, to examine and to provide for an approval if that merger would come along, or not approval, but a review of that merger. I know this is different from the UK. The UK has also something similar like a DMA, and they've actually made sure that there's going to be a completely separate notification system for mergers for gatekeepers. So the Commission did not go as far, but I believe something will be coming out from the Commission that this year will actually amend the merger rules. I'm not saying the merger regulation, but there's going to be something that comes out. Here we have all the tools that people familiar with competition law will recognize. market investigation, RFIs, interviews, statements, dawn raids, if non-compliance, interim measures to stop immediately the conduct, commitments, fines. But I think the one worth mentioning here, the one that's new, is the one in Article 16, and it's called, it's in relation to repeat offenders, people that commit the same violence, the same offense over and over again. And that could eventually lead to breakup. I mean, this is not going to be the first measure, but it's going to be the measure of last resort. If there is no other solution, then that might be the remedy, that's the structural remedy that's appropriate. But that's, again, only as a last resort. It would seem from what I've said that the Commission would take the lead in enforcement. And it's not like with the DSA that actually there would be a lot of cooperation between the Commission and the Member States. Again, this document is not a final document. And we will see where this leads. There is what the DMA does foresee one thing, and that's a Digital Markets Advisory Committee that would meet regularly and where these things would be discussed. I've mentioned Article 1.5, that as soon as the DMA comes into force, Member States can't do anything anymore from a competition law perspective or from a regulation perspective, other than other public interests, as I've mentioned. But Member States, well, actually, Germany has already adopted. They were actually discussing already in the Bundestag, in the Parliament, at the time when the Commission put out on the 15th of December its draft. They didn't adopt back then, but they adopted that they took a decision in the new year, and the Digitalization Act, as it's called, is actually in force. I'm just curious, and I'm sure that Thomas will comment on this and potentially also on what happens if the DMA comes into play as well. Let me tell you a little bit about the legislative procedure. These things are slow because there's lots of discussion. People are trying to, I mean, there's a lot of debate also within member states. Many people have different views. If this is going too far, this is not going far enough. Oh, we forgot this should be there. Also within the European Parliament, many prima donnas that have their own ideas about things. So there will be coalitions, there will be discussions. This could take some time. On average, it takes 18 months. And even the Commissioner has said, if it's there within 2 years, it's going to be very fast. Again, we're not alone. These discussions take place everywhere, in every jurisdiction. Professor Lim has also mentioned this in his introduction. So we will see what comes at some day out of this, hopefully still within this commission, but again, not too soon. I've talked about member states, I've talked about the European Parliament, but we have a lot of opposition from the industry itself, of course, and they will be lobbying and fighting tooth and nail to actually make sure that unfavorable changes will not creep into the document. And of course, last but not least, the new Biden administration is probably not too keen on the EU regulating its companies, its successful tech companies. And we've seen and heard this over and over again, that it's because Europe doesn't have tech industry that they have to do this, and it's protectionism. I'm not sure it is, but in any case, it's something that we will have to deal with the US as well. Luckily, the views in the US have changed, but it doesn't mean we have consensus on all the elements that are described in the DMA. I've mentioned the paper from Senator Klobuchar. It talks about dominance, it talks about percentages. Nothing is said about this here. Some of the EP, European Parliament members, have also said that the Commission forgot to apply the essential facilities doctrine. the commissioner responded to that and said, well, actually, if we would do that, we would have to establish dominance and then look at behavior. The commission is kind of trying to go in between the essential facilities doctrine and the usual ex post enforcement by creating a way, an ex ante way, to get into the markets without having to prove dominance. Simply by calling them gatekeepers, they already have them in the collimateur, as they say in French. All right, I'll stop here. Probably went over time quite a bit, but I look forward to the Q&A in a moment. Thank you.